invitar
So I'm going to invite now
el
Pastor Gustavo Gómes Pascua,
que
who was president of the United Evangelical Lutheran Church during 9 years,
y
and is presently pastor in the
El Redentor y en el
Congregation El Redentor and in the Villa del Parque American Evangelical Institute.
nos va a dar
He is going to give us a talk
el
about education for hope. So go ahead, Gustavo.
Queridas amigas,
Dear friends, those
parte de
who are part of Japan Reformation, it is a privilege, an honor, and a joy to share with you some reflections and some challenges about being seeds of hope in complex times, which is the topic that brings us together. And specifically, I was asked to talk with you and present some questions, some insights about pedagogy of hope. In 2021, we are commemorating the 100th birthday of Paulo Freire, who is a dear and essential Brazilian educator, who has had a profound influence in the whole world. Certainly, Paulo has been translated and discussed all over the world, but had a special influence in Latin America, the region that is somehow promoting this event. So we have the commemoration of the 100th birthday of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire's emblematic and most famous book is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which was written at the end of the 1960s. But just as Pedagogy of the Oppressed was written at the end of the 1960s, in the 1990s, Freire wrote a book called Pedagogy of Hope. That has as its subtitle, Pedagogy of Hope has as its subtitle, A New Encounter with Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So we have here a topic that connects us, the 100th birthday of Paulo Freire and his book, Pedagogy of Hope. Furthermore, talking about hope, this is an event of Protestant schools. In the Christian world in general, but in the Protestant world in particular, hope is a central concept. There's a great contemporary German theologian, Jürgen Moltmann, who wrote also in the mid-1960s a book that is called Theology of Hope. This is interesting, isn't it? So we have Freire writing his Pedagogy of Hope, which dialogues with the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and we have Jürgen Moltmann in Germany writing his Theology of Hope. Furthermore, think about the evangelical world and hope. There is a famous statement by Luther, the statement that says everything that is done in the world is done for the sake of hope. Thus, it seems that hope appears as a central concept in pedagogy, or at least in some pedagogies, which probably are those that interest us. And hope is also a central concept in theology, or at least in some theologies that interest us. So, hope is such an energized concept. So, in which context are we going to talk about pedagogy of hope? What is the context? If we open the door and go to the street and turn the TV, or if we listen to the news, what is the context in which we are going to talk about pedagogy of hope? I think an initial element that we have to consider, which is inescapable, is what are we doing about the pandemic? We don't have to explain everything that the COVID-19 pandemic has meant at the level of health, at the level of the economy, at the level of psychology. We have watched almost post-apocalyptic scenes that we have had since March of last year. The questions, the pain of so many people who lost dear ones, the even worse submission of so many people, immersion of so many people in poverty. So the pandemic is a data that pervades us today. Interesting and difficult in terms of hope, isn't it? But besides the pandemic, another data that we have to consider and which is inescapable is the economic inequity. A global economic inequity that is absolutely unsustainable. I was reading in an electronic publication, of which I'm going to leave the link to you, that I use as an example. For example, if you are invited to attend a party, and in that party there are also many famous persons, like Messi is there, Rafael Nadal, some famous musician, actor, actress, and also the richest people in the world are also there. And you are there. But they tell you when you are at the party that half the room is solely for the wealthiest people and the half of the room is for the common mortals. Where do you think Messi or Rafael Nadal or I don't know, any musician or rapper or singer would be? And where would you be? You may think that you would be on the side of the rich ones, but that is not the case. The people that seem to us to be the super rich ones would be on the same side as the common mortals, with you and with me. On the side of the super rich would be only, few people like Jeff Bezos from Amazon, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and some other North Americans, elderly white people. This is the distance. In reality, the supposedly rich people are closer to you and to me than the true super rich. Well, this economic inequity is unsustainable. It's unsustainable from every point of view. This is the second data of the context in which we supposedly are going to reflect and talk about hope. Furthermore, we have another inescapable data, which is the big data managing our lives and our minds. About this, I don't have to talk a lot because the social media are everywhere. There is an excellent documentary called Nothing is Private in Spanish, which invites us to think anew about our relationships, both with the networks, with the social media, and with the way of dealing with our wishes, with our deepest wishes, with our deepest feelings, with our deepest longings that have, through segmentation, through the management of our lives and minds, through big data. Nothing is Private is a documentary that I leave to you to think about which context we have to talk about hope. But furthermore, we have the democracies that are harassed by real power. Because formal power is one thing, but real power is another one that can be very different. And it usually is. Economic power, this can refer to economic power or to media power. This is another inescapable data when we have to think about the context in which we want to talk about hope and to preach about hope. But I still have more. The earth is being attacked and degraded, showing clear signs of exhaustion. And that at the present course of things will lead us to the environmental catastrophe. There is not much either to talk about global warming, even about the pandemic itself, that shows there are clear signs of unsustainable degradation that have to do with the fuel to use, that have to do with the way we feed ourselves. I have already mentioned the pandemic, right? Yes. So, we have a number of questions. Pandemic, economic inequity that is unsustainable and unbearable, big data managing our lives and minds. We have democracies harassed by real power, the earth that is attacked, degraded, and showing signs of exhaustion. Well, it is in this context that we are supposed to talk about pedagogy of hope. Does it seem to be escapism or is it cynicism? Or is it naivete to talk about pedagogy of hope with all this context that is so critical and so complex? Seeds of hope in complex times. They are certainly complex times in which we are challenged to be seeds of hope. Paulo Freire and complementarily Jürgen Moltmann proposes a few key concepts to enable our hope not to be escapism, nor cynicism, nor and have a foundation as well as naivety. Both Paulo Freire and Jürgen Moltmann propose some context that enable our hope to have a foundation, to have flesh and bones. I would like to share this context with you. A concept I realized when reading Freire, reading Moltmann, is the concept of people. People, this seems a word that is old-fashioned. People, humans, persons. But more than that, collectives of persons with a history, with a culture, with longings, needs, dreams, with abilities and miseries. The concept of people, of collective, appears as inescapable in the thinking of those who are challenging us to combine these topics. So we have to see how to combine, how we include the word people. Another word that is also ancient but is inescapable. This is the word praxis. Praxis is much more than practice. It is practice plus reflection about practice. This is neither pure verbalism, or good mainly because we as churches often fall into verbalism, nor is it pure activism. Praxis makes it possible to connect objectivity, which is inescapable, and subjectivity, which is also inescapable. So praxis, together with people, is also a word that appears to us also as a key concept when we have to articulate our hope. Another fundamental word that Freire proposes to us in order to think about the pedagogy of hope is the word tolerance, the concept of tolerance. I like very much how Freire defines the concept of tolerance. He proposes to understand tolerance as the ability to distinguish those who are different from those who are adversaries. Because it is one thing to be different, for someone to be different, and it's something else to be an adversary. Freire tells us that when we confuse those who are different from those who are adversaries, then the problem is that we are not upholding the concept of tolerance. Would you like to hear another word that is quite problematic and devalued? I will tell you now. It is the word politics. Yes, politics. I know that this is a devalued and suspicious word. But for Freire, educating is a profoundly political action. I am convinced that educating is a profoundly political action. In fact, the more we are told that educating is not a political action, the more political it actually is. Furthermore, I recommend you that when you are told that educating is a politically neutral action, my recommendation is that you hold your wallet firmly and run away from there. Because educating is an eminently political action. The concept of a we is eminently political. Always. So politics is a word we have also to conjugate as well as we can in order to articulate a pedagogy of hope. Another word that is very much used and trodden is the word or concept of reality. Yes, reality. Not only the reality of intellectual persons who can look at and understand the reality in all its complexity, but also especially the more daily and smaller reality of the persons with whom we interact. The Pedagogy of Hope has some precious anecdotes of Freire being taught by persons from the people talking about their reality that is much different from intellectual reality. These realities seem small, but they constitute whole worlds and are also deeply interconnected. And also these apparently small realities are interconnected with a more global and conceptual reality. So the concept of reality is also a concept that we have to conjugate and articulate with the pedagogy of hope. Now I think I'm going to propose an unexpected concept to talk about hope. And the chosen concept is anger. Yes, anger. I know that anger is not a very pious and spiritual concept to be discussed at a meeting of Christian schools. But nonetheless, it is hardly possible that anger should not seize us vis-a-vis the obvious economic, social, gender-related, and ethnic inequities. If at some point this inequity does not cause profound anger in us, I believe that something is broken within ourselves. Something is broken within our churches if we don't feel anger. And something is broken within our schools if we don't feel anger vis-a-vis these inequities. Dear brothers and sisters, dear friends, anger is also a powerful engine for hope. And together with anger, love. Love is also an inescapable concept. Because I like very much a definition of loving that appears in many authors as this idea of making room for others. An Argentine author and philosopher, Dario Sanschreiber, quoting Theodor Adorno, proposes love as withdrawing so that the other may be. Loving is making room for others. Loving means withdrawing so that the other person may be, so that another person may exist. Another classic Christian thinker is C.S. Lewis, proposes in the Screwtape Letters. He defines sin as occupying the space of the other, and the opposite of sin is making room for the others. Loving in the sense of giving oneself. Living oneself is fundamental for us to make room for those who have no place and have no room. Another central concept in Freire, to talk about the pedagogy of hope, and the pedagogy as such is a concept of humanization. You're going to say, Gustavo, the concept of humanization is a secularized concept. It has nothing to do with the evangelical schools. Well, I'm going to respond with a quotation by Irenaeus of Lyon, who was a saint of the Second Church Century. Irenaeus of Lyon said that the glory of God is a living human being. So if we can make slogans and mottos of that phrase by Irenaeus of Lyon, the glory of God is a living human being. Irenaeus of Lyon in the 2nd century. If you can do that, we can say that we are quite orthodox if you use this phrase. To think about the pedagogy of hope also presents us, according to Freire and Moltmann, presents us dilemmas and crossroads. One of these dilemmas is hope versus hopelessness. Freire says that the limit situations may lead us both to hope and to hopelessness. He alerts us that having hope is not something automatic nor guaranteed. It's not guaranteed that we will have hope. We have to construct it, we have to make it possible, because the limit situations allows both, or enable us both to have hope or hopelessness. Another dilemma or crossroads, key dilemma or crossroads is for Freire the dilemma between authority and freedom. In my view, it is magnificent and an immense gesture of freedom and of responsibility, the fact that Paulo Freire mentions this dilemma. Authority against freedom. How can we articulate authority and freedom? It would have been much more comfortable to Freire if he continued in his role as a Bohemian pedagogue and did not raise this topic that is so dear to conservative pedagogies, rather than precisely with pedagogy of the oppressed. But Freire knew, and I think that we also know that educating has to do with combining authority and freedom, including it has to do with the concept of meritocracy and merit, which are not the same thing, but they are connected, and it has to do to do with rendering account to our educational communities and to ourselves for thinking as we do and underpinning our positions on these topics, without lying to them, without lying to ourselves. The crossroads, fundamental crossroads I would like to share with you, is the one that we experience in the Protestant churches, or at least those Protestant schools that I know, in the context of the Lutheran Church in Argentina. It does represent the crossroads that we experience in the situation we are now. Clearly, it is clear that the schools are not part of the 1% of the owners of everything, of the richest people. I assure to you that the richest among the rich do not come to our Lutheran schools in Argentina. They go to other schools, but not to our schools. It's clear, the first data. But the second case, together with the first, is that our schools are not those that reach the people who are at the very bottom. In the case of Argentina, which is the one I know, our schools are usually directed to not to the richest 1%, they don't come to our schools, but we also are directed to the 10% of the poorest ones. And generally, our classes are usually directed to the middle classes in a broad and generous sense. And a middle class made up of people who are self-employed, people who are still employed, wage earners, business people, professionals, teachers, and we also get funds from the state, which also means to participate in a more general and global economic entity. So we are not among the richest of the richest, we are not neither among the poorest of the poor. So extreme poverty is something else. This is not the people who come to our schools, at least in Argentina. Rather, our schools are trying not to fall off from an economic, our school communities are trying to not fall off from an economic and social system that does push and pushes to the outside. In this context in which the schools are, it's very difficult and problematic to talk about the burning and painful topics that I mentioned. First of all, economic inequity, all kinds of environmental and climate injustice, assailed democracy. We don't feel secure in our schools. We don't feel authorized, and we are feared to deal with these topics. We are afraid to give an account of our hope. We do not want to do this, or it scares us. Furthermore, in Argentina, but also in Brazil, but also throughout the world, our societies are experiencing polarizations that create tension for and jeopardize the forms of life we know. So our schools do not go to the 1% of the richest ones, nor to the 10% of the poorest ones. In our school, we are under the pressure of playing the game as it is established. Otherwise, the state will no longer support us. Otherwise, our families will get angry or get scared and take their children away from our schools. So, in this polarization, and not in which we don't know how to, what role we should play, we talk about what we try to be Central Korea. Do you know this ironic concept that is used often in Argentina, particularly in the city of Buenos Aires? But do you understand the concept of Central Korea? We certainly know that there are two nations called Korea that are radically different. One is North Korea, which is militarized and communist, and the other one is hyper-capitalist, North Korea and South Korea. So this apparently no agreement is possible between them. Now, being Central Korea means being neither one of them. But of course, there is a problem with this, dear brothers and sisters, because Central Korea does not exist.
inmensa.
This is an immense crossroads.
Radicalizar.
How can we radicalize and deepen our commitments and our hope without getting dogmatized and without shutting ourselves off? And also, how can we do this without the false neutrality of trying to be Central Korea?
Es una pista
This is a clue
Dumbledore.
that Dumbledore offers
Primera película.
in the movie Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It's a very famous quotation.
Se
It
necesita
takes a great deal of bravery to standing up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends.
radicalizar nuestros
You
compromisos.
know, to radicalize our commitments and our hope.
Normalmente nos va a tocar.
Eventually, we have also to stand up to our friends or those who are supposedly on our side, or to think or feel or who celebrate worship with us, those who make money like we do. It's difficult.
Enfrentar a los amigos.
The difference is much easier to stand up to the enemies. But to stand up to our friends is something more complex.
Parece que es
But it seems to me to be a fundamental key to be able
darle carne y hueso.
to give bone and flesh, to give a foundation of our hope. So concluding, certainly for us hope has to do with our faith
Maneras.
in many different ways.
Es
And
importante.
it's important to know that hope does not mean optimism.
Solo hemos confundido.
They should not be confused.
Pero la esperanza no significa
Optimism does not, hope does not mean optimism, but a certain stubbornness.
Lo dice muy lindo.
An Argentine theologian, Nancy Better, puts it very well when she talks of the insistence of the resurrection.
¿Sí? La
The insistence of the resurrection, stubbornness,
emperramiento con la resurrección.
insistence of resurrection. This is hope, much more insistence and stubbornness than optimism.
Porque ya vieron, los tiempos.
Because, as you know, we live in complex times.
Además, porque
Because, as Jürgen Moltmann puts it in his Theology of Hope,
a Dios
it is not possible to have,
esperarlo,
one cannot have God, one can only hope for God.
atraparlo.
We cannot catch God. We can only hope for Him. We'd like to conclude to share testimony of hope, that is also testimony of faith.
Que creo que también es un testimonio de fe.
The testimony of hope and of faith
Decía,
was offered to me when I was rereading the Pedagogy of Hope. Paulo Freire himself told a story about himself, a precious story.
nos muestra
It shows us a very young Paulo Freire. He has just concluded law school and recently began his career as a lawyer. He became a pedagogue later, but in his origin he was a lawyer. He was newly married. He had his first job as a lawyer.
aborda su carrera de abogado recién iniciada.
We see him throwing away his newly started career as a lawyer. He had his first job, his first lawsuit, and he decided not to be an advocate. What did he have to do in this first job? Now, Paulo Freire had been hired by a creditor, and he had to sue an insolvent debtor. The insolvent debtor, when Paulo Freire met him as a lawyer, when he met the insolvent debtor to inform him that he was going to sue him, he found out that there was a young dentist that who had incurred the debt to equip his consulting room. But life and the ups and downs of his country had not been favorable to the payment of the debt, and he wasn't really able to pay. So, after the conversation
este joven abogado
with the defendant, this young lawyer, after his conversation with the defendant, the insolvent dentist, and he had the whole law in his favor, he would win the suit. He said he would not continue. He decided not to continue the case. So he had to give up his first job that the young and newly married Paulo had just gotten. And he also decided at that moment not to devote himself to his career as a lawyer.
¿sí? Tomamos la
Now we can look at you realize how big is the jump or leap that Paulo was making. Do you have an idea of the face that Elsa, his wife, would have made when he arrived home and told her that he was giving up his newly started career? I'm going to give you a spoiler. Elsa received the news splendidly because she had already suspected. She had the intuition that Paul would devote himself to something else. So this anecdote allows us to reconsider our concepts from the beginning. People, praxis, tolerance, politics, reality, anger, and love, as they were put to work in the life of Paulo Freire himself. May this obstinate and joyous hope shape our hope and our commitment for a world in which there is room for everyone, where the glory of God becomes manifest in the life of human beings. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for your attention.